this stage, our workbook is much more useful than it had been. We now have formulas in place, and if we need to edit data for sales or expenses, the formulas will react properly. We also want to put in totals along the right-hand side of the data that we now have, and perhaps averages and other pieces of information that will allow us to create more information from our basic data of sales and expenses. If we change any sales or expense entry, the formula, as we said, will react properly. And that's why our formulas are written by referring to cell address. If, for example, if the April sales figure of 250 is incorrect, perhaps that was really 255, if we simply type in a 255, as we hit enter, keep your eye on the cell, 2 cells below that, E4, we'll hit enter. E4 is currently 35. As we hit enter, it changes to 40. And of course, the reason is that cell E4 subtracts whatever is in E2. And of course, cell E4 subtracts E3 from whatever is in cell E2. The next thing we'd like to do here is to put a total in column H. So we'll go to cell H1. We can simply click on it, type in the word total. Notice, by the way, that it's not automatically bold, even though the cells to the left of that are. We can change that a little bit later. What we'd like to do here is to add up the content of cells B2, C2, D2, etc., all the way through G2. Based on our formula that we wrote earlier, which was a simple subtraction, you could probably sense how we would do this in its most primitive way. We would type equal sign B2 plus C2. Now, I'm not going to continue this because I think you can sense that that's a lot of typing. And imagine if this were 12 months, we'd have to put in 12 separate entries. If it's a 2-year period, 24 separate entries, and so on. So I'm just going to hit escape here and not complete this action. There are 2 approaches we could take here. One, the longer way, is to use for the first time in this particular worksheet what's called a function. There are over 300 functions in Excel, and the most common one is sum, S-U-M. Now, if we were to type this, and let's do it, and we'll contrast it with an even shorter method. If we were to type equal sign S-U-M, this is then followed by a left parentheses, we could either type or highlight this entire range of cells here, B2 through G2. Now I'm dragging. Notice 2 things happen when I drag this. The highlighted cells are surrounded with what we call marquee lights. Looks like a moving lights on a marquee. And you'll notice a little banner off to the right and slightly below it, 1RX6C, which means 1 row by 6 columns. And at the same time, even though I didn't type B2 colon G2, that's what appears here behind the parentheses after we typed in sum. So let me hit escape here and do this over again just to point out what we've done. Equal sign, S-U-M, left parentheses, hands off the keyboard, switch to the mouse, click and drag, and by the way, you can click and drag left to right or right to left across these cells. Let go. Now, you would expect to hit right parentheses here, and you certainly can. There's nothing wrong with that. But Excel is also smart enough to recognize that if you don't hit the right parentheses, it knows that that's what you meant anyway. So you simply hit enter, and it has calculated the result for you. Notice in the formula bar, the sum of all cells from B2 to G2. The notation is a colon. You didn't type it. You could have typed this information, but that's the notation that Excel uses to indicate you mean all the cells between the 2 and including them, B2 through G2. So that information is accurate, and if you were to add those up, of course, you would see that is the correct answer, 1465. Once again, I'm going to delete this and show you an even faster method that automatically inserts the sum function for you. In the toolbar, the standard toolbar, you'll notice a button that says Auto Sum. If your active cell, in this case H2, is at a spot where you logically could do a total, if you click on the Auto Sum button, Excel will display what it thinks you want to do here. And notice what it's displaying. the very same entry that we had just previously typed. And if we click on AutoSum again, or if we simply hit Enter, the entry will be complete. So if your active cell is in a location where a total could logically be achieved, the AutoSum button will make the entry that it thinks you want to do. Now, after you try this a few times, you'll become confident with it. And if, for example, you put in all your numbers and you click here, you'll simply go to the AutoSum tool and click twice with the left mouse button. Double click, click, click. The entry is in place. Much faster. You could then drag from the lower right-hand corner. Remember how we did this earlier? We did it across a row. This time we're dragging it down the column. What's this going to do? If this formula in H2 adds up the 6 cells to its immediate left, if you point to the lower right-hand corner to that fill handle and drag downward, you will get the same relative answer in the next 2 cells. So in cell H3, you'll see it's the sum of all the cells from B3 through G3. H4, all the cells from B4 to G4 are totaled. One more shortcut here. If we didn't have any of these totals in place, if we simply highlighted them and clicked a single time on the AutoSum button, we would have all of our answers in place. You may have noticed very briefly on the screen there where the function actually flashed in front of you. And another way to do this is if you were to highlight all of this data here, leaving those empty cells on the right, and click this button, it puts in the totals that way too. So at this stage on our worksheet, we have data typed in place here. We have a formula across the bottom here. And we have variation on the formula, a function called sum that's put in place here. Remember, we talked about 2 ways to put the sum in. Either we typed it explicitly or we used the AutoSum button in the standard toolbar. Now, our worksheet has just been enhanced by the use of a function, sum, the most widely used of any of the Excel functions. We're also going to use average, and we'll talk about a few more. But do notice that our worksheet is growing in complexity. It's certainly not complex yet. But we want to talk more and more about how the worksheet becomes more of a tool that you can work with. And we also want to shift the focus at some point here to talk about the look of the worksheet, because increasingly it becomes more important as, for example, if you want to print this and take it into a meeting, you want certain features of it to stand out. You want it to look better and look like you know what your workbook is all about. It's not uncommon in your worksheet that if you have a total, it might also be appropriate to have an average. Let's suppose we go to cell I1 and just type in the word average. And in cell I2, we'd like to calculate an average. There are a couple of ways we could do this. Since we already have a total in the adjacent cell, we could simply divide that by 6. So perhaps the fastest way here, not necessarily the best, but the fastest way to put an average in cell I2 is to type equal sign and then either click on or type the address to the left. You can click on the cell, H2. The division symbol is the slash. Now, this appears twice on your keyboard. On the extreme right-hand side of your keyboard, you will notice there's a plus, there's a minus, and to the left of that there's an asterisk and a slash. Slash means division. What would we divide by here? 6, and then hit enter. Notice the answer isn't even. It's 244.1667. In reality, it's 0.1666. 6 is a repeating decimal, but the display is rounded. And we could certainly copy this downward. We talked about this before. If we click on the fill handle in the lower right-hand corner and drag downward, we'll see that the same relative kind of calculation will take place in cell I3, which says H3 divided by 6, and in the cell below that, H4 divided by 6. So this is the fastest way to do an average. Now, one slight disadvantage would be as follows. If we did not have data in June or May or April, And let's imagine that a worksheet like this could be used on a month-to-month basis. So if it's early March, maybe you have your January and February figures in place, but you have nothing else. And in early April, you have January, February, March data in place, and so on. You may want to have your formula out here in place from the beginning. And it wouldn't make sense to have your total divided by 6. The average function is sensitive to where there are entries and where there are not. So if we were to rewrite this entry here as equal sign average, A-V-E-R-A-G-E, left parentheses, average, and then highlight these cells, the average of B2 to G2. Notice as you do this, by the way, 2 positions on your screen. The formula bar is displaying what you have typed or highlighted already, and the cell that you're in, sometimes it does wrapping because there's not enough room, is also displaying the same information. The average of B2 through G2. You can hit right parentheses, or in this case, simply forget it, hit enter. You have the same result for now. However, the point to be made is that if one of your entries, and I'll just take off the June entry for a moment, if one of your entries is empty, I'm going to hit the delete key. The average responds, the average function responds, by saying, I'm going to look at all your data and divide by the number of entries. If you were to work this out with pencil and paper, you would see that the total here of these cells, which is 1,065, is divided by 5 to come up with this answer, not 6. Excel saw that there was nothing in the cell whatsoever, therefore the average function does not include it as an entry. If we were to put 0 here, notice that as soon as I hit enter, this 213 to the right will change. And what's happened here? Excel has said I'm going to add up all the entries here, adds up to 1065. I'm going to divide by 6, since there is information in 6 cells. So the average function does have particular rules, and depending upon the context of what you want to do, you want to be aware of the fact that at some point, whether a cell has data in it or not, you'll get a different answer. I'm going to put the number 400 back in place here. All right, our workbook now has a lot of information in it, considering what we started with. Once again, let's remind ourselves, this data here that is currently highlighted is pure raw data. It was typed as is. Information in row 4 contains formulas here that subtract information above it. Information in column H is a sum of the 6 cells to the left, and the average function averages those 6 monthly entries. If you have to make a change, if, for example, the March entry here is incorrect, if we were to change this to 205, before we hit enter, let's point out what's about to happen. Certainly this cell, D4 right here, will change. It's the difference of the 2 cells above. And certainly the total over here in H2 is going to change, since D2 is totaled there. And of course the average to the right of that will change. This cell right here, H4 will change because D4 is about to change. And I4 is going to change since the average here will be different. So as I hit enter, 5 different cells will change. Anytime we change the content of any of these, information will change in at least 2 locations in our total column, 2 locations in the average column, and 1 location here. 5 other cells will change. Now, your goal in a worksheet is not to make as many cells change as possible, but just to present the information that you need to know. And as a byproduct of that, typically you will have formulas that cause changes throughout a workbook. In this section, we talked about how to enter data in a worksheet. We showed how if you put text into a cell, it automatically aligns along the left-hand side of the cell. We talked about the shortcut called autofill. Remember how we entered January in a cell, and then we dragged from the lower right-hand corner of that cell across the screen to enter subsequent months automatically. We then showed how to enter numeric information, and it's automatically aligned on the right-hand side of the cell. After getting our data in place, we shifted the focus toward entering formulas, and we gave you the basic concepts there, starting with the equal sign and how to type in or use the mouse to put addresses in place. And after that, we showed how to use the sum function using the AutoSum tool, and then we entered the average function. At this stage, the worksheet is all set so that we can now look at how to format it and make it look better for printing.